welcome back to another university segment of the REIMAGINE 2020 Virtual Conference version 2. I'm your co-host, Ashlie Meredith, Head of Education at MouseBelt Blockchain Accelerator. And today I'm interviewing a returning guest, Taylor Kendal. He's the Chief Program Officer of LearningEconomy.io. Some of you may remember his appearance at our last conference during a panel entitled The Future of Education. So if you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend you go find the REIMAGINE 2020 YouTube channel and watch that panel. We talked about how in our ever increasingly digital world, blockchain and other technologies may help us transform the ways that we both teach and learn. So welcome back to the show, Taylor. How are you doing today?
Good, and thank you, Ashley, for having me back. Apparently, I didn't offend anybody too much, so you let me back on the stage.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, last time, we spoke kind of in general about the future of education, so I really wanted to invite you back to dive a little deeper into your current project, LearningEconomy.io. The website states that you are the steward of the Internet of Education. So, can you tell us what is the Internet of Education, and what does it mean to be a steward of it?
This is a new sort of vision and meme that has surfaced, I guess, within the last year that we're leaning into quite a bit. And I think by the time this is out, there will actually be an internetofeducation.org website that folks can also get more information about this sort of idea. I'm hoping, I know this is now on the books. I think that'll be the case. The Internet of Education, much like IoT, the Internet of Things, and some of these sort of ideas are born out of this idea of connecting people, connecting systems, connecting data. We have been pushing and envisioning a future where education sort of is in a singular connected ecosystem. So IOE, the Internet of Education, is a global sort of meme, as much as we hope to sort of push and propagate and help catalyze the idea. It's certainly not a central sort of project or platform that we ourselves at Learning Economy are behind or are central to. It's much more about the idea of a global network and vision of connecting all humans on Earth to education and economic opportunity. So that's central to a lot of our work, is to sort of push towards realizing that vision.
Excellent. And so what is Learning Economy's exact role in that ecosystem, and how are they stewarding this meme of the Internet of Education?
Yeah, we see ourselves as, currently really a catalyst, but hopefully eventually a steward and sort of a node within this broader network. And our role currently is to lay the sort of foundational infrastructure to allow such a vision to become a reality. It's certainly still sort of a blue sky idea, and there's a lot of work that still needs to go into to getting to that blue sky, but more and more our role is to identify sort of the ladder, the practical rungs of that ladder to get us up to that blue sky. That comes in the form right now of supporting collabs, supporting regional, state level, national, even international and global sort of networks and ecosystems that have a shared vision towards that future, and are willing to pull together the right resources, the right leaders, both technical and social infrastructure, to start to build the layers and the elements that will map towards that vision. And certainly distributed ledger technology, identity protocols, sort of new means of re-envisioning the internet itself, that I think is core to a lot of your work and a lot of those in this network are familiar with. There's a host of things that sort of are going to, I think, hopefully push us towards that sort of future. But right now, yeah, we like to use the GPS ecosystem as an analog, much in the way that took, many decades to get to the point of having a really simple means of navigating from my device, to something I'm interested in, whether that's, a sandwich at a local shop or a good barber to get my hair cut, whatever it might be. you know, we at Learning Economy are, you know, a sort of a single player in the early, I think, infrastructure that will move us towards a learning GPS ecosystem. So, and again, we've got a ways to go to get there, but that's sort of our role, is to help build the foundational elements that ultimately can move us in that direction.
Right. So I think what you're saying is, you know, similar to a lot of the conversations we had in the Future of Education panel, there's these lofty ideas about, you know, how we can have instant background checks, learning experiences that are quantified and qualified and put on a way that we can show employers easily. Or even the big dream, I think, that you had and I have, is that you could actually get paid to learn instead of what the system we have now, right? Which is tons of student debt. And one thing I heard Andreas Antonopoulos say was, you know, we've become so attached to the systems, especially he was talking about the academy, that we forgot why we're doing it, which I think the end goal would be learning and being able to prove that you learn those things in order to join teams or organizations to use those skills. So pretty lofty goals. And so it sounds like you're saying Learning Economy is kind of laying out what are the steps that we need to take to get there. So going to your roadmap, it looks like you guys became a nonprofit late last year, and that you recently launched a lab network, and you're currently working on something called the Education 3.0 network. Can you talk a little bit more about what that process was like, becoming a nonprofit, a little more about what the lab network and what Education 3.0 means to you?
Yeah. It'd be nice if this stuff were simple, but there's just a lot of layers, and there's a lot of everybody, I think, involved in this work realizes that this is sort of a time for systems thinking, and most of these challenges are global in nature. And so some of the complexity, I think, that comes out in exactly what you just laid out to try to describe is just part of our work, trying to make clear what right now is a pretty lofty and complex and complicated sort of you know, system of many players, many actors, many stakeholders, many competing interests, all of that. So, so with that in mind, we realized that, I guess, as part of our work, it really didn't make sense to, we do have technology and elements that we layer in when it makes sense, but we realized at the core of a lot of what we were doing, it wasn't about the profits. It wasn't about having a singular product necessarily. It was much more about building a neutral, sort of neutral convener and means of allowing anyone that wants to be a part of shaping where education goes. And to do that, we thought, you know, it really made sense to be a nonprofit. So we went through the process and are just on the other end of that 501(c)(3) status. And so, Learning Economy Foundation is now a nonprofit. And within that, I guess there's a couple different elements. One are collabs and these laboratory sort of spaces. We have a number of those that are sort of currently in process and in progress to pilot certain elements of what we see as sort of foundational utilities for this idea of the Internet of Education. I work a lot in Colorado. We have a really strong ecosystem at a state level in partnership with the Department of Higher Education as well as the Governor's Office. We also have a lab across the K-12 district in Broward in Florida, Broward County Public Schools. They're doing a lot of interesting work at the sort of K-12 level around skills mapping and understanding what it really means for a student to own a specific set of skills and how that can sort of transfer and translate as they progress in their education, as well as another lab across the Asia Pacific region looking at cross-border mobility. So that's sort of a core pillar to what we're working on, are these sort of R&D labs around the world. The Education 3.0 network started sort of in parallel to a lot of our work and acts as sort of a research vehicle. So a number of folks have been convening weekly and thinking through, what is the foundational research that needs to come alongside a lot of this to both steer the ship, but also put up the right guardrails when when hard research actually surfaces. One example is, do students actually really want to own and control their own credentials and their own skills data? We think that a lot of core problems surface from the fact that we don't necessarily own our own data, but the Ed 3.0 network and a lot of the research is meant to validate and really build out the sort of hard research to say there's sort of deeper proof behind why some of these new shifts in both technology and just sort of mental frameworks and paradigms that need to shift. So yeah, those are some of the elements that are, again, under this broader umbrella of us as an organization and a nonprofit, but then also this broader vision and meme of the Internet of Education.
Yeah, so I know that we met through the blockchain space, but I was curious as to whether there was a particular focus. You said that you're trying to be this neutral body of let's just look at the problem and find solution, but is there any particular maybe preference or interest in blockchain technology specifically to solve these problems, or is that just kind of a tangential interest?
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal interest of mine. I have watched the technology and the just sort of ecosystem in Colorado evolve. ETH Denver being an event and a community that I've been tied into for a number of years. So aside from it being a personal interest, it also, I think, obviously maps to some of the core changes that likely need to come along with our work at Learning Economy. I would say it's it's not a core focus. And again, coming back to the idea of just what are the foundational sort of infrastructure layers that ultimately need to come together. I think, broad public key infrastructure, using decentralized identity and a lot of the identity work. I think a lot of those, as much as blockchain can and will, I think, interface with some of those elements. It's not like top priority right now to build out a blockchain network. There are those that are looking at that right now. The Velocity Network Foundation. There are others that have blockchain like at the core of what they're working towards. I think it's inevitable that it will, some form of DLT, whether it's sort of what we know blockchains to ultimately be right now, or it's some, variation on it with things like, Cosmos and other sort of, broader interoperable blockchain networks. A lot of the sort of v2.0 work. I think all of that eventually will absolutely influence our work, but it's a small piece of what ultimately needs to come about, I think, in the short term. A lot of the standards work obviously also just needs to evolve, and we're working a lot with W3C, the Decentralized Identity Foundation, DIF, other groups that are all IEEE. We're doing quite a bit of work to build out some best practices through those standards bodies, and I think that's all step one before we build out the sort of full blockchain enabled system that ties these pieces together and allows, the beauty of it that I think we all appreciate. You can maintain the proprietary value that comes along with data. You can maintain privacy and intellectual property concerns, all of those, with things like zero knowledge proofs. I've more or less bought in. That is absolutely a part of the future, but we've just got a lot of work to do in the near term. But there's a ton of interesting pilots. I'll also mention a quick plug for lerhub.org. This is a project that we launched with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and their T3 Innovation Network. And there are a number of pilot networks evolving across the U.S. that are discoverable there in that resource hub. And a number of those are implementing blockchain solutions directly. So.
Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to include in the show notes some of these websites, if you can make sure to send them over to me, and we'll have them on the YouTube channel and people can check all those out. So given that this is a blockchain conference and kind of geared towards students and kind of trying to motivate them to think about blockchain as a career or to learn more about it, could you just dive in a little more deeply or kind of explain maybe one or two use cases that is like why people should be thinking about blockchain as it regards to education, maybe students who are interested or working on educational technology or in the education space might also want to add some blockchain competency to really make them stand out in this job market and dive into the blockchain space.
Yeah, I'm just old enough to have sort of missed the wave, and I wish if I could go back and somehow layer in a blockchain course or two, I know that would now be paying off in almost any career. The broad applicability, and I think most that are in this world understand that as much as it is a technology, it has implications that run across a number of domains. So first of all, absolutely, if you have the option and as you're working through your educational path and if you're the institution you might land at happens to have courses or programs or student clubs, whatever it might be, I'd say it's just a critical layer to add to the sort of skill set for any student. And again, not even those that know that they want to go into a technical field. I think that importance comes from the likely systems that will sort of underlie, maybe a good analog is something like the, financial industry, sort of in many ways parallel to folks' awareness a few decades ago. Large credit card companies started to do a lot of work with banks, and all of a sudden, sort of on the other end of that, we had credit cards, and we had this like network of more or less financial stability where banks had an understanding of how they transact with retailers anywhere across the country and around the world. I think this is an opportunity for students that have an interest in reshaping education to get at the ground floor of some of that early infrastructure for the education system and the credentialing and signaling system, the sort of employment pathway, the career pathway work, helping shape how those sort of new systems will evolve, as opposed to just sort of looking back and realizing that we're now part of this new system, but didn't really understand how it came to be or what the underlying technology is. I think a lot of folks that spent a lot of time just dabbling on a computer when they started to come about now have a lot of we're seeing this just in the sort of technical divide. Unfortunately, there's those that sort of never had the opportunity or their time to really understand how the internet evolved, how computers evolved. I think putting time into understanding how distributed systems currently are evolving, and that's not going to the deep technical level of like understanding of exactly how a Merkle tree functions, but just having an awareness is going to be of immense value, regardless of career choice. The most obvious example in education is around credentialing, and I think a blockchain is just a very obvious element to add on to, as I learn specific skills or knowledge, and as opposed to that being represented on a paper transcript by the time I kind of move through my four to 6 years of college, that actually gets anchored in a trusted way onto a ledger that's immutable in some way. And so I have more means and more flexibility of then utilizing those granular skill sets to signal to employers that I'm the right fit for the job. So that's the kind of I think systems that are emerging, and a lot of the pilots we're seeing right now are all exploring that sort of future. So yeah, go take blockchain courses. Go take crypto courses. It'll pay off.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that no matter what it looks like, if you're interested in these kinds of problems, the solution's going to end up being some kind of decentralized ledger technology, and being a part of the evolution of that, and it's just really going to give you a leg up. So I also encourage anyone watching this, join MouseBelt University, come take some of our online classes, hop on our weekly calls, and just get to learn this a little more if you're interested in solving these kinds of problems. And speaking more about the availability or the ability of students to learn about blockchain, you're in the Denver area as well. That's where we met. I know that Learning Economy works with the CU university system and maybe some of the state legislatures. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what the temperature of blockchain is in Denver, in Colorado in general, at universities, and what you know about what's hot in Colorado.
Yeah, I'm certainly biased, having been here my whole life and sort of seen some of it evolve. But I do think it represents just a really fertile ecosystem to do this work. Obviously, other places, Wyoming, with a lot of the legislative work there is doing amazing things. So yeah, I mean, in some ways, I would say the sort of ebbs and flows that we see in the sort of crypto markets themselves often map to the interest and buzz that gets tied into university courses and programs, and interest at that level. So those two seem to be correlated, which isn't a big surprise. I think we've kind of emerged. Unfortunately, we sort of emerged out of a crypto winter. We're now seeing a bit more of a bear market, but that's combined with the pandemic. And so now we've got these this interesting interplay of existential threats from a virus, a reemergence of interest in what this technology represents. And I would say at the state level, both from sort of a state agency and legislature perspective, as well as universities and faculty and programs, there's definitely a new interest, and part of that, I think, also just maps to the virtualization of education itself, as we're all having to find new means to innovate and actually educate students around the state. There are 4 or 5 really strong clubs: Denver University, the CU Blockchain Alliance. Those groups all, still have, I think, a lot of interesting work going on, and are still trying to, understand how that mechanism within the, quote unquote system can be a vehicle for disruption. And so I think, yeah, we'll see. I think 2021 is going to be an interesting year that, that actually probably starts to build some proofs behind the technology and how it can actually start to make change. I'm also kind of concerned that some of those potential changes will be deflated by the fact that, education broadly is sort of just in reactionary sort of triage mode of like, how do we just build the right base to work from socially, and make sure that, that we can actually provide education to students around the state. So I don't know, it feels like a non-answer. I'm in some ways encouraged because I've seen an uptick in a lot of, buzz, because people feel this to be a time when, like, let's actually really start to innovate and change systems because of the pandemic. But I also am fearful that there will be those that sort of get left behind because they're just in reactionary mode trying to deal with COVID. So for what it's worth, and those that do have the time or can put resources into, blockchain, distributed sort of work, systems thinking, global networking, and all of that, I think, is important right now. And there are going to be institutions and state level systems that push ahead and try to make that part of the future, and there will be those that don't. And part of our goal is to help like bridge those two worlds, and make sure that we can build systems that ultimately are going to benefit us on the other end of this thing.
Absolutely, and that's great. Kind of brought back the theme of this version of Reimagine 2020. So our first conference, we kind of launched that um, in response to a lot of our students' events were being canceled, and we knew people were kind of stuck at home, and we thought it was a great time to just press pause and reimagine how the world could look, given that we've been all forced to press pause. And I think since then, since May, we have only seen more and more failure of our current systems, failed responses to the pandemic, economic issues, political issues in the US and abroad. So this conference's theme is disrupting the system. So I love that you talked so much about how this is an opportunity to do that. There is a lot of interest around that. And I think especially in the education space for people like you and myself who've been thinking about these problems differently for a long time, with MouseBelt University have been organizing virtual courses for 2.5 years, that maybe this is our moment. This is what we've been not waiting for, but this is what we were building for, was for responding and hopefully not being reactionary, being proactive and trying to provide educational opportunities that are accessible to everyone. So love what you're doing with Learning Economy, and I hope everyone can go check that out at learningeconomy.io. And so just to wrap up a bit, given that a lot of students are not returning to campus, we all seem to have a little bit more free time. I wanted to ask a fun question of all my interviewees, which is, how are you continuing to learn right now? What are you reading? What are you listening to? Tell us, give us some recommendations of good content or what you're learning right now.
Yeah, I'm like intentionally not learning in some cases, and I mean that. I think it's for our own sanity, taking time to just disconnect. And I've been taking later, runs into the evening and just trying to like decompress and separate from the onslaught of information. And we're coming into this next political season here that also has me concerned, because I know that's going to be something else we're all going to deal with, at least in the US. But all that said, I absolutely am digging into a few new things. I'm a podcast junkie. I know, Ashlie, I think we kind of connected on that as well. I have probably 50 podcasts that I let roll through my feed. Can't get to them all. I probably have 10 of those that I like make sure I have to look at each week. I was just pulling up to see Hidden Forces. I love. That's sort of a go-to. The Jim Rutt Show does a lot of interesting work around blockchain. I love The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. It's a community I've been tied into for a long time. They have a ton of great content. So podcasts, just like, as I'm trying to keep my own sanity, listening to a lot. I'm reading right now a book that I think is interestingly like prophetic, from Zach Stein, called Education in a Time Between Worlds. He's a sort of philosopher and futurist, and has done a ton of incredible thinking around the just sort of broad phase shift. This book was written prior to COVID, but there are remarkable parallels that he draws, and I think it's a really timely book. Just looking at sort of what are some of the tool sets and models we can start to build into our thinking to allow us to adapt to a world that is clearly shifting under our feet. And he uses Ken Wilber's integral theory for those familiar with that, and sort of layers integral theory into education itself. And I think just gives a lot of really good and also really deep thoughts around how to think about education, and how to sort of disconnect it from our typical modes of thought, which is that education is this very well-defined system, and we understand the pieces, and this is just how it's always going to be. You've got your tests, you've got your grades, you've got these specific time blocks. You go to school from this time to this time, and he kind of blows all that up. And I think this event, in a lot of ways, which is why I love what MouseBelt does and love the thinking, I think they map well together. And right now, I think is a time to, just get outside of our own frame, and that's hard to do. But I think we're all stuck behind our own eyes in a lot of ways, and that's causing maybe more problems right now, and keeping us stuck in old patterns. But I think I'm doing as much as I can from my own sort of personal education standpoint to break that mold, to do the things that can disrupt myself. So happy to share any of that with you and others. Please be in touch. I love just jamming on any interesting big ideas, and there's a lot of good content coming out right now that does that.
Yeah, I love that statement of not only do we need to disrupt the systems, but we need to disrupt ourselves and the way that we've been thinking about these things in the past. And you mentioned that book to me last week, and that futurism philosophy, education in the future is totally my jam. So I'm going to check it out. Hope some of our students watching who are interested in this stuff check it out, and get in touch with Taylor anytime if you want to learn more about how learning economy is setting up the foundational infrastructure needed to really take us to those lofty ideas of a better education system. So thank you so much, Taylor, for joining us. Thank you for everyone who tuned in, and stay tuned for more of the Reimagine 2020 version 2 conference, Disrupting the System.